Welcome everybody to Frank Analysis. My name is Franco, and today I am joined again by activist and writer of Medium.com, Glory Jones, who is also an honorary member of the MCSC network. So thank you again for coming on, Glory. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on again. It's so good to just, keep talking to different people who really get on the ground with their research.
Right, and today, speaking of which, we're gonna talk about something really important that even in the independent side of news should be talked about more because of what's happening to him threatens our rights to free speech, and that is we're gonna talk about Julian Assange. And I want to start by asking you how you first started being an activist for Julian Assange.
Right, so initially I wasn't too outspoken for Assange. I was very much in favor of WikiLeaks and what they were doing, specifically with some of their major releases like the war logs and the Snowden leaks, and also recently the 2016 leaks. But I didn't really start getting more outspoken for Assange until I actually started supporting Tulsi Gabbard, because she kind of, in the past, with other kind of, we call them neo-progressives, it doesn't feel necessarily welcome to push the Assange issue so hard, and especially because it wasn't something that Bernie was in vocal support of, so it's not really something that you could have mentioned much. But when I saw Tulsi supporting it, and when I also felt that, volunteering for her felt like also getting her message out there, that's when I was like, okay, part of this message is a pro-Assange kind of agenda, it being in support of Assange. So after that, I just became much more outspoken for Julian Assange. I'd never thought I'd be able to communicate with Christine Assange, his mom, through Twitter. And part of that was just trying to email and call as many representatives as possible. I do unfortunately have several unreturned calls from my rep, which is Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. But I had tried to contact other reps about this. The only person I've really gotten a response from is Tulsi, because I was able to ask her in person. And then I actually emailed a couple of members of parliament in the UK, and I actually got a couple of positive responses. I know one of them even actually wrote to the, not the Department of Justice, the Ministry of Justice on my behalf and on the behalf of other Free Assange supporters that were emailing him and contacting him. So just trying to get the word out about Assange, doing stuff through Twitter. And also I would try to just go to, local meetings, whether it be anything from Code Pink to even getting into arguments with the local college Republicans president. I would just try to get the word out there of Assange, because his case it's so big, but at the same time it's being massively swept under the rug. So that's why in these recent years, as the case against him ramps up, it only becomes more important how louder we become.
And the more we get the message out, hopefully the more people we inspire to get on the ground and push Congress people and other people in office to do something about this, because this really threatens all of us. Because what this tells us is that, we live in pretty much an authoritarian government who, when it comes to free speech, when you reveal secrets that the government does with our taxpayer money. So right now, Assange is being held in Belmarsh prison in UK, and he is awaiting his trial. There will be protests in DC in September, of which I will be attending. And I wanted to ask you, Glory, if you know of any protests that will be happening in other parts of the country so that more people can attend.
Right. So I'm not sure of protests that will be happening outside of DC yet, just because I know a lot of activists will specifically be concentrating their efforts onto DC. But I know in the past there's been a protest in, I think there might have been one in New York. There was one in, I know there was one in San Francisco, and they also had a couple events on his birthday as well in different locations in the United States.
Right.
And as well, earlier last year, they weren't doing protests, but they had a couple of forums actually that were just basically educating people on the Assange case. I remember because I went to one that they had at UCLA. It was literally just a 4-hour forum with like constitutional lawyers and even some of Julian's lawyers and some of the people who specifically studied his case. And they were just basically talking to us, answering our questions, and really educating us about his case and what we can do to help that as well. I know they had one of those at UCLA, and I know they also had one in New York and DC, I'm pretty sure, was one of the locations as well. So just different events. And I don't know too much about the specific on-the-ground events in London just because I'm not there, but I know they're out there protesting, you know, pretty often, I'd say, especially considering we're in the middle of this whole COVID thing. They were protesting outside for Julian's birthday even. And Stella Morris, his partner, actually said that when she called Julian, he was saying how he heard the protesters and the prison guards were telling him how there was like a nice vibe outside because, you know, it was kind of a birthday celebration as well.
Yeah, it was his birthday on July 3rd. So happy belated birthday to Julian Assange. We wish him all the best with everything that's going on, which I do want to read a little bit on what I read on an article that was recently published on Consortium News. And it was called "The UK Officials May Be Legally Culpable in the Torture of Julian Assange." And Glory, please feel free to give some commentary after I read some of what is written here. So what's written here is that doctors have warned the UK officials could be held accountable for the torture of Julian Assange in an open letter published in The Lancet on International Day in support of victims of torture. So the 216 undersigned physicians and psychologists, again, that's 216 different physicians and psychologists. They're from 33 different countries. They have all accused the UK and the US government officials of intensifying Julian Assange's psychological torture in spite of the world's leading authorities of human rights and international law calling for the immediate release from prison. Clinical psychologist and Australian co-author of the publication, The Ongoing Torture and Medical Neglect of Julian Assange, Dr. Lisa Johnson, said that the failure to properly treat Mr. Assange may amount to an act of torture in which state officials from parliament to court to prison risk being judged complicit. So I also want to mention how they failed to have him go to 4 court hearings in a row on medical grounds. So Gloria, do you want to add on to anything that was written here? These were 216 different doctors that signed this letter.
Well, to add to that, I remember it. I know there's like an ongoing kind of effort from doctors specifically to actually make open letters calling for his releases, because I remember a while back it was like 113 doctors or something like that. Dr. Jill Stein among them. Now it's up to the number it currently is. And just to add to that part of the letter where it said, you know, it risked being an act of torture, it already is an act of torture because back in the embassy, the UN, one of the UN special reporters on torture, he specifically said that Assange was showing signs of psychological torture, and this was while being in the Ecuadorian embassy. So this wasn't even including, you know, the day he was dragged out of the embassy or his time in Belmarsh prison while being ill, while being forced to stay in a cell for 23 hours a day. So it's at this point, it's honestly no question of whether he's being tortured or not. It's just he is being tortured, and part of it is just from the pure weight of having the whole empire against him right now. And it's, and the UK and US are essentially complicit in it, and they're adding to it by just, the UK just being absolutely useless in being able to, defend Julian at all, and the police essentially dragging him out of the assembly. And
yeah, I'm gonna have this letter in the description for people to read. It's not too long, but it's really important to see, how much torture they're putting on this one man just because he revealed some embarrassing secrets that a government did that were illegal. And I do want to mention his fiancée, Stella Morris. She was mentioned in this article saying that she's afraid that he won't survive because of how unwell he is. And I know that yeah, go ahead.
He's essentially, his mother, Christine, she basically said that Julian already has a chronic lung condition, which put him particularly at case for catching the coronavirus. And on top of that, he has a bunch of conditions that went untreated back from his time at the Ecuadorian embassy, because while in there, he wasn't able to get proper hospital care for everything. And so all those problems and little aches and pains he had there, on top of the fact that he was being, psychologically tortured, are just, I imagine that they're just exacerbated now while being in prison. And, Stella says it almost every time we see video of her, how scared she is for Julian, how she's so worried about how they're going to break him and how he's extremely ill. And, she's worrying that she might not see him again. So it's the weight of the empire working against not only Julian, but his whole family in just this gut-wrenching way.
Yeah, and I know that his mom also has a Twitter account in which many activists communicate with her to try to give her support. And I just want to ask you how his mom is doing right now, and what kind of support can we all give her during these really terrible times?
So, right now she's actually taking a break from Twitter because she said it herself. She's sick. She said it in a tweet that she's sick, so she's just going to take a week off from Twitter. But she left us with essentially, every resource she shared over the course of her timeline. But she's just amazing. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second half of your question again?
Yeah, like what kind of support can we give her? I do remember her putting out that tweet and saying to, like, if anyone has any questions or anything, to contact Stella Morris, who's, again, Julian's partner. But right now, during the break that she's having, is there any way that we can continue to give her support for her and her son?
Just to keep doing whatever we can to support Julian. Because I know I've seen it across, like, obviously I've never met her in person, but I've seen it across many Twitter interactions. What makes her really happy is learning about the things we're doing ourselves to help fight for Julian. Like, if you reply to one of her tweets saying, I contacted blank members of parliament today, that helps her. That makes her feel a little better. Or if you say, I tied a couple of yellow ribbons and put Free Assange on them to the local, trees in my neighborhood, that makes her day. So, she's said it a couple times on Twitter. Things that really make her feel better are hearing about what we're doing to help fight for her son.
Yeah, and I just want to mention also how the mainstream media also operates as a tool for this authoritarian behavior that the U.S. government is performing right now. And rather than inform people about the limitations of real free speech in this country and the injustices that are being acted upon Assange, the lefty mainstream media is still spewing out Russiagate talking points, which has long since been debunked. And in an article written by Caitlin Johnstone called Assange Extradition, Free Speech in the U.S. Empire is as illusory as free-range eggs. Caitlin Johnstone writes that, as former MSNBC host Crystal Ball explained last year, an attitude of conformity has been manufactured from the top down to ensure that those who rise to the top of the most influential platforms are the ones who know how to toe the establishment line without being told. People are hired from the same conformity enforcing universities by executives who were selected by media-owning plutocrats based on their willingness to protect the status quo their plutocrat kingdoms are built upon. And only those who play ball within the system ever rise to major positions of influence. So I know that you're a university student right now, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on whether our current system is actually designed on purpose to conform people to not challenge authority.
Yeah, it is, no doubt. And especially because specifically I'm an international relations major, so the moment I walk into like an international security class or a politics of the global economy class or any course like that, immediately it's like, how many CIA talking points can I hear in an hour and a half? It's, you know, at this point I have to try and find like cynical joy in trying to just like debunk everything coming at me. And it's also sad because there is a general discouragement of using WikiLeaks sources in the international studies academia, even though everything they've published is literally 100% true. So one of the things that I try to do is I just try to incorporate WikiLeaks sources into my own stuff, even though I'm not going for a PhD exactly punish me for it, but just trying to do little things to try and normalize WikiLeaks, because everything they're publishing is 100% true. It's all primary resources. It's not some random 30-page paper written by some scholar who went to Harvard and who has like free Syria in his bio or something like that. No, it's concrete, verifiable facts. So stuff like the OPCW Duma leaks or the war logs or collateral murder video themselves, or even the diplomatic cables. We shouldn't be afraid to use them just because they're WikiLeaks, because they're true. Yeah. So a big part of the education is trying to steer people away from that area of just, you know, really going the adversarial road to the mainstream and trying to think for yourself and find facts to prove it and really get down to the primary resources. Because I remember having to write papers for some of my history classes, and they require more secondary resources than primary resources, which made absolutely no sense to me. It's like, why would I want to know what some 60-year-old academic is saying when I can just get the primary source right here and analyze it for myself? So that's something that's happening a lot in academia. And again, I'm just saying, like, the general acceptance of just utter CIA propaganda it's a thing in colleges, and it's not something that, you know, conservatives would complain about, where it's like, oh, you know, the leftist media is brainwashing our colleges, they're anti-right-wing. No, actually, colleges are a lot more right-wing than you think. They just put on a mask of being socially liberal so they can get away with pushing these imperialist policies. And just to add to that media point as well, how do I say it? There are very few smart people who are at the top of media, or there are very few not only smart but independent thinking people who have the positions that people like Rachel Maddow do, or Chris Hayes, or Andrew Cuomo. I mean, there's few better examples than Andrew Cuomo as just like you don't want smart independent thinkers on your network, because they're eventually going to do their own research and they're going to see beyond these narratives and they're going to find the truth. That's why you never see, that's why you only see that's why you never see Jimmy Dore on MSNBC. Mm-hmm. That's why we have to resort to literally Tucker Carlson to watch someone like Anya Parampil. Mm-hmm. And like, Anya's brilliant. And even though I don't agree with Tucker Carlson, it's refreshing to see someone as great as Anya, you know, on TV.
Yeah.
So
he also had on Jimmy Dore. But yeah, these mm-hmm. people on mainstream news, they don't have their critical thinking skills that high. That's not the way that they were brought up in their universities. They don't teach them how to think critically. They teach them what to think. So they sound very textbook smart, and like they read a lot of books and a lot of literature, but they're not taught to be critical about the work that they read. They have a very biased perspective, and they think that just because they're like Rachel Maddow is attacking Trump, that she's being critical. She's not being that critical. She's just being biased. She's doing what her corporate owners tell her to do. So that from early on in our education, like when we're kids, we're also taught what to think rather than how to think more critically. So even from an early start, we're molded to be this way. But some of us break away from that and start to think more critically, and that's thankfully what we're seeing more of, you know. And at least we find some enjoyment in finding, you know, the more esoteric channels out there that are presenting authentic news, like things like Mint Press News, The Gray Zone, WikiLeaks. They've never had to retract a single article before. They just tell you not to cite these articles in, you know, university. They get banned from Wikipedia just because they're classified as, you know, controversial, even though nothing that they're publishing is untrue. Mm-hmm. It's all based on facts. And it's really disheartening that they tell you in your classes to not cite any primary sources. I mean, as information travels from one person to another, that information changes. So it's ridiculous for them to encourage you to only cite secondary sources to cite secondary sources more than primary sources. That's really unfortunate, but I mean, it's not surprising. And the more we bring this to people's awareness, the more we try to incite motivation to change this system that we're in.
Yeah, and another thing to add to that is, you know, people, you know, a lot of teachers and colleges, they try to encourage people to, you know, want to learn more and to build upon what they already know. But what we have to be able to teach people, especially during this time when you see the debate over the whole statues debacle, is you have to be able to not just learn more, but to unlearn what you already knew. Because you're taught from literally 4th grade to essentially worship people like, you know, Christopher Columbus, or in my case, growing up in Florida, it was Ponce de Leon, some conquistador who discovered Florida, and just like Columbus, participated in a genocide against the native people. And just growing up, learning about how Fidel Castro was, you know, worse than Hitler, like the Cuban equivalent of Hitler or something like that. Or, you know, essentially endlessly vilifying a figure like Che Guevara for fighting against imperialism. And all these things that you're taught up until literally the day you graduate college, you have to be willing to unlearn those things. Because, you know, I myself used to love American history, and I still am a massive history nerd, but it took a lot of unlearning. I had to unlearn everything I knew about Juan Ponce de Leon so I could learn the true history of his crimes against humanity. I had to unlearn everything I learned about Europe and its expansion, and how essentially they decimated the Arab community because, you know, Arab nationalism was like a counter to imperialism. And, you know, unlearn the fact that we were that we were these saviors from communism when we were going around the world killing people like Patrice Lumumba, who was trying to bring independence to Congo after centuries of decimating imperialism. And just more stuff like that. People have to be willing to unlearn as well. And it's never too late to start either.
Yeah, and once you unlearn that and you know some of the truths, you'll find a lot of the truths that are happening now to not be that surprising, that these are things that we've been doing for a very long time and they've been built upon. And lastly, I do want to bring up one final article here that I found. I want to let everyone know the kind of people who we have running for congressional office. You know, some of the people who we have running for congressional office. We do have some great people who are trying to change the system, but this in particular really needs to be brought up. This is from Mint Press News by Alan McLeod, and it's titled Democratic Candidate James Averhart Personally Oversaw Solitary Confinement of Chelsea Manning. Again, this psychopath's name is James Averhart, and he is running for Alabama's 1st district, and Democrats will be voting on July 14th in the district. So McLeod writes, during her time at Quantico, Manning was held in solitary confinement, a practice roundly condemned by human rights groups. The United Nations and almost universally described as a form of torture. In her testaments and complaints, Manning singled out Averhart as a particularly sadistic torturer, claiming that he entered her cell, he yelled at her, and he declared that he was her quote-unquote God with a capital G, implying that he had total control over her life. And Averhart repeatedly rejected psychiatrists' constant recommendations that Manning should not be held in a solitary confinement in an 8 by 6 foot cell around the clock. According to Manning's complaint, she said that on January 18, 2011, over the recommendation of Captain Hochter and the defense forensic psychiatrist, Captain Moore Averhart placed me under suicide risk. The suicide risk assignment resulted in me being required to remain in my cell for 24 hours a day. I was stripped of all clothing, with the exception of my underwear. My prescription eyeglasses were taken away from me, and I was forced to sit in essentially complete blindness. So what do you think of this? What do you think this says about the current state of our country, that we allow such a person like Averhart to run for any office at all?
Well, I mean, first, I just want to say how it still amazes me to this day how Chelsea Manning went through all she did and did not break. It just
she's a very strong
amazes
soul.
me, and she's an absolute hero for that. And I think it just speaks to how people are just so propagandized in this country, because a lot of people, I bet a lot of people don't even know that. And if they don't know that, then they don't really care that much, because they either A, don't know about the case of Chelsea Manning, or B, they're one of those sociopathic neocons that think she should face the firing squad for revealing war crimes. So it just speaks again to how propagandized people are in this country. And unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me that that man thinks he can get a job in within our government, because that's how the revolving door operates, and that's how our government operates, is it uplifts the most evil people in our society. You know, there's a widely circulated video of Mike Pompeo when he says, "I was the director of the CIA. We lied, we cheated, we stole." That video of him is widely circulated, and at the end of the video he goes, "Oh, it just reminds you of the glory of the American experiment." And that man is our current Secretary of State. Because we don't prosecute war criminals. Instead, we uplift them to the highest positions of government. That's the twisted way in which the system operates in America.
Just look at how they're normalizing people like George W. Bush and Dick Cheney just because they're opposing Trump. You know, they're they're normalizing them as if they're like, oh, you know, they're like our conservative uncles, like our conservative crazy uncles who George Bush dances with Ellen DeGeneres. You know, it's like really disgusting to see this happening. And what we need to do is we need to wake more people up to what's going on. We need to let more people know about Averhart and how he's running for Alabama and what he really did. Because I'm sure a lot of people don't know what happened, and that's because the information wasn't presented to them. But as we inform more people, we create a domino effect where they inform other people until it finally reaches the people who really need to hear the truth, because it's happening really nearby where they're living, or right where they're living in Alabama. So thank you so much, Glory, for coming on. I do want to ask if you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we finish here.
I will add, the only other person I know who wants to get involved in politics, specifically running to replace W. Wasserman Schultz as a representative in Florida's 23rd district, is Jen Perlman right now. And I wouldn't be bringing this up if I didn't hear her in public voice her support for Julian Assange, and especially because I know her personally, I know her campaign manager personally. I talk about Julian Assange and an anti-imperialist foreign policy with them all the time. So they know how important this is, and I just want to speak to that because I think Jen is literally the only person, the only kind of progressive person running for Congress right now who is actively pushing that, you know, pro-Assange, anti-imperialist policy platform.
All right, Jen Perlman 2020. You know, I recommend a lot of people check her out. We need more progressives in office, even though right now the establishment is really controlling people like Ilhan Omar and AOC, as what we saw with them voting for the CARES Act. We still need more voices out there to help influence people like them to do the right thing. We need more people in Congress who are voicing the truth about Assange, like Tulsi Gabbard, like Jen Perlman. So check her out. I encourage people to read more about what's happening with Assange. Mint Press News, Consortium News, and Gray Zone are great places to get your information from. Gloria,
and Steve from Slow News Day.
Steve from Slow News Day.
In Action for Assange. They're doing vigils twice a week. They're just informative streams that you can go hang out on.
And Steve will be back. I will invite him back onto the show before the September protest, just so we can get some more information before that happens, so we can get as many on the ground when those protests start. So again, Gloria, thank you for coming on, and to everybody else, don't forget to stay informed.